The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned textile factory in Kandahar province. As Staff Sergeant Jessica Hamilton pressed her eye to the scope of her M24 sniper rifle. 400 meters below, 20 American soldiers huddled behind concrete barriers and burned-out vehicles, completely pinned down by enemy fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jessica's hands were steady despite the chaos unfolding beneath her. She'd been in this elevated position for 3 hours, watching the patrol get systematically trapped by what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated ambush. The insurgents had chosen their ground well. A maze of abandoned buildings and narrow alleyways that turned every corner into a potential kill zone. Through her scope, she could see the faces of the trapped soldiers. Sergeant Mike Torres was pressed against an overturned Humvee, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his left arm. Corporal Danny Richardson kept trying to establish radio contact with base, his voice increasingly desperate as static filled the airwaves. Private Lisa Chun, barely 19 years old, clutched her rifle with white knuckles while debris from near-miss RPG rounds showered down around her position. But it was the enemy sniper that held Jessica's attention. She'd been tracking his movements for the past 20 minutes, watching him systematically work his way through firing positions in the factory's water tower. He was good, methodical, patient, and devastatingly accurate. Already he'd wounded 3 soldiers and was clearly working toward more lethal shots. Each time he fired, another American was forced deeper into cover, making their position more untenable. Jessica calculated the distance: 847 meters. The wind was gusting from the southeast at roughly 12 miles per hour, and the temperature was climbing toward 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat would affect bullet trajectory, and the wind would require careful compensation. She'd made longer shots before, but never with this much at stake. Her radio crackled with incoming transmissions. Phoenix Base, this is Reaper 6. We have 20 personnel trapped in Grid Square 4-7 Alpha, requesting immediate air support. Over. The response made Jessica's stomach tighten. Reaper 6, Phoenix Base. Negative on air support. All birds are grounded due to dust storm conditions. 80 on weather clear is 4 hours minimum. 4 hours. The soldiers below didn't have 4 hours. The enemy sniper was already lining up his next shot, and Jessica could see additional insurgent forces maneuvering to completely surround the American position. This wasn't just a firefight anymore. It was about to become a massacre. Colonel Patricia Hayes' voice cut through the radio chatter with unmistakable authority. Hamilton, you are to maintain observation only. Do not, repeat, do not engage the enemy. Your orders are reconnaissance and reporting. Jessica's jaw clenched. She knew those orders by heart because she'd been hearing variations of them for the past 4 years. Despite scoring higher than 90% of male soldiers in marksmanship training, despite completing every advanced sniper course the Army offered, despite proving her capabilities in training exercise after training exercise, she was always relegated to observation only when it mattered most. The official policy had changed too. Years ago, women were now officially allowed in combat roles. But changing policy was different from changing attitudes. And Colonel Hayes represented the old guard that believed women had no place on the front lines. Every mission briefing, every deployment, every opportunity for real combat experience ended the same way. Hamilton, observation only. Through her scope, Jessica watched the enemy sniper adjust his position. He was targeting Sergeant Torres now, the wounded soldier who couldn't move quickly enough to find better cover. Torres had 3 kids back home in Texas, twin boys, who just started Little League, and a daughter who was learning to read. Jessica had seen their pictures dozens of times during the long flights into the theater. Phoenix Base, Reaper 6. We are taking effective sniper fire from the water tower. Request permission to neutralize threat. Reaper 6, negative. Hold position and wait for extraction. But there would be no extraction. Jessica could see what the radio operators at Phoenix Base couldn't. Additional enemy forces moving into position to block every possible escape route. The insurgents weren't just pinning down the patrol. They were setting up for a systematic execution. The enemy sniper fired again. This time, his bullet found its mark. Corporal Richardson jerked backward, his radio flying from his hands as he crumpled behind a concrete barrier. He wasn't moving. Jessica's breathing slowed as she entered. The focused state that every sniper knew. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, the gentle pressure of the trigger beneath her finger, and the target 847 meters away. She could see him clearly now, a bearded man in his 30s, wearing a mixture of civilian clothes and military gear, completely absorbed in selecting his next victim. Asterisk. Hamilton, confirm your status. Are you maintaining observation only? Colonel Hayes' voice seemed to come from another world. Jessica looked down at the trapped soldiers, at Torres trying to apply pressure to Richardson's wound while staying low enough to avoid the next shot, at Private Chun, who was so scared she'd stopped returning fire altogether. 20 soldiers. 20 families back home who were counting on these men and women to come back alive. 20 futures that hung in the balance while Jessica sat 847 meters away with the skills and equipment to save them, but orders that explicitly forbade her from doing so. The enemy sniper was lining up another shot. Jessica could see his rifle barrel tracking toward Private Chun's position. In 30 seconds, maybe less, that 19-year-old girl from California would be dead, and there would be nothing anyone could do about it except write a letter to her parents explaining how their daughter died following orders. Jessica's finger found the trigger. Her breathing stopped at the natural pause between exhale and inhale. The crosshairs settled on the enemy sniper's center mass, accounting for wind drift, bullet drop, and the slight upward angle of her shot. She thought about the court-martial that would inevitably follow, about the end of a military career she'd fought 4 years to build, about the 20 families who would get phone calls tonight telling them their loved ones were coming home instead of letters explaining why they weren't. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the .308 caliber round screamed across the desert air, crossing 847 meters in 2.1 seconds. Through her scope, Jessica watched the enemy sniper's rifle tumble from the water tower as his body pitched backward and disappeared from view. Hostile sniper down, she reported calmly. Area secured. The change below was immediate. The trapped soldiers broke from cover, finally able to move without the threat of precision fire from above. They began advancing toward extraction points that had been death traps just moments before. Torres was already coordinating casualty evacuation for Richardson, whose wounds appeared survivable now that they could get him proper medical attention. But Jessica's radio remained ominously silent. She knew what was coming. Colonel Hayes wouldn't forget this act of disobedience, and military justice didn't recognize saving lives as a defense for violating direct orders. Jessica had just ended the military career she'd spent 4 years trying to build, all for the crime of doing exactly what she'd been trained to do. As she began breaking down her rifle for the long climb back to base, Jessica looked one more time at the soldiers below. They were alive. Torres was helping Richardson to his feet. Private Chun was laughing with relief as she realized the shooting had stopped. 20 families would have their loved ones home for dinner instead of folded flags at military funerals. Jessica shouldered her equipment and began the descent toward whatever consequences awaited her. For the first time in 4 years, she'd been allowed to be the soldier she'd always known she could be. The fact that it would probably be the last time didn't diminish the satisfaction of knowing she'd made the right choice when it mattered most. The radio crackled 1, Final time as she reached the base of the ridge. Colonel Hayes' voice was ice cold. With controlled fury. Staff Sergeant Hamilton, report to my office immediately upon return to base. You are hereby confined to quarters pending formal charges for willful disobedience of direct orders. Jessica keyed her radio for the last time. As an active duty soldier. Copy that, Colonel. Hamilton inbound. 3 weeks later, Jessica sat rigidly in the defendant's chair at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, facing a military tribunal that would determine whether her split-second decision to save 20 lives would cost her everything she'd worked for. The courtroom was sterile and intimidating, with fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows across the faces of 5 male officers who would decide her fate. Colonel Patricia Hayes sat at the prosecutor's table, her uniform immaculate and her expression coldly satisfied. Hayes had built her entire career on rigid adherence to military protocol, and Jessica's active disobedience represented everything she believed was wrong with allowing women in combat roles. This tribunal wasn't just about one soldier's insubordination. It was about proving that women couldn't be trusted to follow orders when emotions ran high. Staff Sergeant Hamilton, Hayes began, standing with theatrical precision. You are charged with willful disobedience of a lawful order, engaging the enemy without authorization, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, each word carefully chosen to emphasize the severity of Jessica's actions. How do you plead? Jessica's defense attorney, Captain Rebecca Stone, was one of the few people in the room who understood what Jessica had actually accomplished. Stone was sharp, experienced, and frustrated by the institutional blindness that treated saving lives as a criminal act. But legal expertise didn't always translate to victory in military courts where precedent and protocol often mattered more than justice. Not guilty, ma'am, Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. She'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but facing the actual tribunal felt surreal. These officers were judging her for doing exactly what every sniper training manual said was her primary responsibility: neutralizing threats to American forces. Asterisk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hayes smiled with the cold satisfaction of a prosecutor who knew she held all the cards. The facts are straightforward, gentlemen. Staff Sergeant Hamilton received explicit orders to maintain observation only. Instead, she chose to engage in unauthorized combat, directly violating not only my command but also established protocols for reconnaissance operations. Captain Stone immediately objected. Ma'am, the defendant's actions saved 20 American lives. Surely the tribunal must consider the context and consequences of her decision. Overruled, General Thompson said without looking up from his notes. The defendant's role was clearly defined. Whether her actions produced favorable outcomes is irrelevant to the question of whether she followed lawful orders. Jessica bit back her response. She wanted to stand up and explain that military protocol was supposed to serve a purpose, protecting American forces and accomplishing mission objectives. When following orders would have resulted in the deaths of 20 soldiers, the protocol itself became counterproductive. But military justice wasn't designed to debate the wisdom of orders, only compliance with them. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. Hayes called witness after witness who testified that Jessica had received clear, unambiguous orders to observe only. Communications specialists played radio recordings that captured the exact moment Jessica had been ordered not to engage, emphasizing her deliberate disobedience. Military discipline, Hayes continued, exists because individual soldiers cannot be allowed to substitute their judgment for that of their commanding officers. When soldiers, especially female soldiers in sensitive positions, decide they know better than their superiors, the entire chain of command breaks down. The way Hayes emphasized female soldiers made Jessica's jaw clench. This wasn't really about following orders. It was about proving that women would make emotional decisions instead of rational ones, that they couldn't be trusted with the life and death responsibilities that combat required. When Captain Stone called Jessica to testify, the courtroom fell silent. Jessica stood, smoothed her dress uniform, and walked to the witness stand with the same confidence she'd carried into every dangerous situation during her 4-year career. If this was going to be her last day as a soldier, she'd meet it with dignity. Staff Sergeant Hamilton, Stone began. Please tell the tribunal about your military record. Jessica's voice was clear and professional. 4 years of service, expert marksman qualification for 3 consecutive years. Graduated top of my class from the Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. 2 commendation medals for excellence in training. Exercises, instructor certification for advanced marksmanship, and completion of the Special Operations Urban Sniper course. And on the day in question, what did you observe through your scope? I observed an enemy sniper systematically targeting American soldiers. He had already wounded 3 personnel and killed Corporal Richardson. The soldiers were pinned down, with no air support available and no viable extraction route. Jessica's hands remained folded in her lap, her posture straight despite the emotional weight of recounting that day. The enemy sniper was targeting Private Chun when I took the shot. She's 19 years old, ma'am. Without intervention, she would have been killed within 30 seconds. What went through your mind in that moment? Jessica looked directly at Colonel Hayes. I thought about my oath, ma'am. To support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance, and to protect the soldiers serving beside me. She paused, her voice carrying quiet conviction. I thought about Private Chun's family, who sent their daughter to serve. Her country entrusted us to bring her home safely. Hayes shot to her feet. Objection. The defendant's emotional response to the situation is irrelevant to the question of following lawful orders. Sustained, General Thompson said, but Jessica wasn't finished. With respect, sir, my job as a sniper is to neutralize threats to American forces. I had the shot, I had the capability, and I had 20 soldiers who would have died if I'd followed orders instead of doing my job. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs until Thompson's gavel restored order. Hayes' cross-examination was brutal, designed to portray Jessica as an insubordinate soldier who put her own judgment above military authority. Tell me, Staff Sergeant, Hayes said, circling Jessica like a predator, if every soldier decided when to follow orders and when to ignore them, what would happen to military discipline? Ma'am, I believe good soldiers use their training and judgment to accomplish the mission while adhering to the spirit of their orders, even when circumstances prevent them from following the letter. The spirit of your orders? Hayes' voice rose with controlled indignation. Your orders were explicit, observation only. Instead, you revealed your position, engaged in unauthorized combat, and compromised operational security. How do you justify that decision? Jessica met Hayes' glare without flinching. Ma'am, when American soldiers are dying and I have the training and equipment to save them, it becomes my duty to act. 20 families have their loved ones home today because I made that choice. That was not your decision to make. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Jessica had just confirmed everything Hayes wanted the tribunal to believe, that she was an insubordinate soldier who believed she could override military authority based on her personal assessment of the situation. But as Jessica returned to her seat, she caught sight of the gallery. In the back rows sat the 20 soldiers she'd saved. They weren't supposed to be there. Showing support could be seen as attempting to influence the court. But they'd come anyway, silent testimony to what her single shot had accomplished. Torres sat in the front of that group, his left arm still in a sling from the wounds he'd sustained during the ambush. Richardson was there too, alive despite the bullet that should have killed him. Private Chun sat beside them, no longer the terrified teenager Jessica had seen through her scope, but a confident soldier who understood exactly what had been at stake that day. Their presence should have felt like vindication. Instead, as Jessica watched the tribunal's stone-faced expressions, it felt like a farewell. The panel had already made their decision before she'd ever taken the stand. Her military career was over, sacrificed for the crime of being too good at her job when it mattered most. The verdict came 2 hours later. Guilty on all charges. Reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and dismissal from the United States Army with an other than honorable discharge. 4 years of service, expert qualifications, advanced training, and the lives of 20 soldiers. None of it mattered as much as the fact that a woman had pulled a trigger when a man told her not to. Jessica's military career ended not with honors or recognition, but with the institutional confirmation that saving lives was less important than following orders, regardless of consequences. As the tribunal adjourned, Jessica stood and faced the 20 soldiers who'd risked their careers to attend her court-martial. Their silent salute said everything that military protocol wouldn't allow them to speak aloud. They knew the truth, even if the institution refused to acknowledge it. Jessica returned their salute with the precision and pride of a soldier who'd served with honor, even if that service would never be officially recognized. Jessica's apartment in Clarksville, Tennessee, reflected the discipline that 4 years of military service had ingrained in her soul. Even 6 months after her discharge, her bed was made with hospital corners, her boots were aligned with mathematical precision, and her few possessions were arranged with the kind of order that civilian life seemed determined to destroy. The single photograph on her nightstand showed her graduating sniper class at Fort Benning, 1 woman among 47 men, all of them believing they were training to serve their country with honor. Jessica stared at that photograph every morning, wondering when everything had gone so wrong, when protecting American lives had become a criminal act instead of a sacred duty. The job search had been a series of humiliating rejections. Corporate security firms wanted team players, not soldiers with other than honorable discharges for insubordination. Police departments were interested in veterans with clean records, not markswomen who'd been court-martialed for disobeying orders. Even private shooting instructors hesitated when they saw her discharge papers, as if her legal troubles might somehow contaminate their businesses. Jessica's bank account showed $147 remaining from her final military paycheck. Rent was due in 5 days, and her landlord had already made it clear that military service didn't earn special consideration for late payments. 4 years of expert training, advanced certifications, and life-saving skills had translated into exactly nothing in the civilian world. She was calculating whether she could afford groceries and utilities when the envelope arrived. It was expensive stationery, heavy cream paper with a watermark she couldn't identify. No return address, just her name written in elegant script, Ms. Jessica Hamilton. Not staff sergeant, not private, just the civilian title that represented everything she'd lost. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper and a business card. The letter was brief and intriguing. Ms. Hamilton, your reputation for excellence under pressure has come to our attention. We represent clients who value results over politics, capability over conformity. If you're interested in utilizing your considerable skills in environments where they'll be properly appreciated, please call the number below and ask for Mr. Blackstone. Compensation begins at $180,000 annually. Respectfully, Atlas Security Solutions. Jessica read the letter 3 times before examining the business card. Atlas Security Solutions was embossed in silver lettering with a phone number that had too many digits to be domestic. She'd heard whispers about companies like Atlas during her military service, private security contractors who operated in the gray areas between government policy and operational necessity, taking contracts that official military forces couldn't. Touch, $180,000 was more money than Jessica had ever imagined earning. It was enough to start over completely, to build a new life where her skills would be valued instead of criminalized. But she'd learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true, especially from organizations that operated outside normal oversight. Jessica stared at her bank statement, then at the eviction notice that had arrived yesterday, then back at the mysterious letter. Sometimes desperation made decisions easier. She picked up her phone and dialed the international number. The voice that answered was crisp and professional, with a slight British accent that suggested military background. Atlas Security Solutions, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with Mr. Blackstone, please. May I have your name? Jessica Hamilton. One moment, please. Classical music filled the line while Jessica waited, something she recognized as Bach, though she couldn't name the specific piece. Her father had played classical music during Sunday dinners when she was growing up, back when the world was simpler and her biggest worry was whether she'd make the varsity basketball team. Ms. Hamilton, a new voice said. It was male American, with the careful diction of someone who'd spent time in dangerous places and learned that words could be as important as weapons. Thank you for calling. I'm Marcus Blackstone. I trust you received our correspondence. I did, though I have to ask how you found me. A soft chuckle. We make it our business to know where exceptional soldiers end up, especially those who've been poorly served by bureaucrats more interested in politics than protecting American lives. The reference to her court-martial was subtle but unmistakable. Blackstone had done his homework, which meant this wasn't a random recruitment call. What exactly does Atlas Security Solutions do? Jessica asked. We provide specialized security services to clients who operate in challenging environments, corporate executives in unstable regions, humanitarian organizations in conflict zones, energy companies in areas where local governments can't guarantee safety. Blackstone's voice carried the weight of experience. Our personnel are former military specialists who understand that sometimes the best way to prevent conflict is to demonstrate the consequences of starting one. Jessica understood the euphemism. Atlas was a private military company that provided armed security in places where conventional law enforcement was inadequate or non-existent. It was legal, lucrative, and exactly the kind of work that would value her skills instead of criminalizing them. Are you familiar with the Democratic Republic of Mabala? Blackstone continued. Jessica frowned. The name was vaguely familiar from intelligence briefings during her deployment. West Africa. Former French colony, oil reserves and political instability. Correct. Our client is an American energy company with substantial investments in offshore drilling platforms. They need security consultation for personnel protection and asset security. Another pause. The local situation is complicated. Government forces control the capital, but most of the countryside belongs to various rebel groups who view foreign energy companies as legitimate targets. Security consultation was another euphemism Jessica recognized. Blackstone was talking about armed protection for American workers in a country where kidnapping foreign nationals was a profitable industry. What would my role be? Team leader for a small unit providing overwatch and rapid response capabilities. Your sniper qualifications make you particularly valuable for counter-sniper work and long-range threat assessment. Blackstone's tone became more serious. The compensation is $180,000 for a 6-month contract, plus hazard pay, full medical coverage, and life insurance. All legal, all above board, with proper diplomatic coordination. $180,000 for 6 months was more than Jessica would have made in 3 years as a staff sergeant. It was enough to pay off her debts, build a savings account, and establish the kind of financial security that would give her options when the contract ended. What's the catch? Jessica asked. The catch is that Mabala is complicated. The government barely controls the capital city, and outside the major population centers. It's tribal territory with shifting alliances and a healthy black market in military-grade weapons. Blackstone paused. It's not Iraq or Afghanistan, where you had the full weight of the U.S. military behind you. This is more entrepreneurial, Jessica understood. No rules of engagement written by Pentagon lawyers, no oversight from officers. More concerned with politics than mission success. No court-martial for making the hard decisions that kept people alive. When would I leave? There's a flight tomorrow evening from Nashville to Paris, then on to Brazzaville. From there, helicopter. Transport to the operational area. We'd need an answer within 2 hours. Jessica looked around her sparse apartment, at the eviction notice on her kitchen table, at the photograph of her sniper class where she'd believed military service meant something noble. The Army had thrown her away for saving lives. Maybe it was time to find people who valued that skill. Send me the contract, she said, already done. Check your email. And Ms. Hamilton? Blackstone's voice carried a note of respect that Jessica hadn't heard in months. Welcome to Atlas Security Solutions. We're looking forward to working with a professional who understands that doing right matters more than following rules that don't make sense. The line went dead, leaving Jessica staring at her phone and wondering if she'd just made the best decision of her life or signed up for something that would destroy what remained of her idealism. The contract was thorough, professional, and surprisingly transparent. 20 pages of legal language that essentially said she'd go where Atlas told her to go, protect who they told her to protect, and keep quiet about operational details. The money was real. A $25,000 signing bonus would hit her account within 24 hours. With the balance paid monthly. At the bottom of the final page was a handwritten note. Some missions require soldiers who understand that protecting innocent people matters more than bureaucratic approval. We believe you're that kind of soldier. M. Blackstone. Jessica stared at the signature for a long time, then signed her name with the same precision she'd once used to take impossible shots. 24 hours later, she was on a plane to Africa, leaving behind the country that had trained her, decorated her, and ultimately discarded her for the crime of being too good at her job when it mattered most. As the plane lifted off from Nashville International Airport, Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe there were still places in the world where a soldier's value was measured by lives saved rather than orders followed. The helicopter descended through thick tropical humidity toward the Sunrise Energy drilling platform 20 miles off the coast of Mbabala. Through the aircraft's window, Jessica could see the massive industrial structure rising from the Atlantic Ocean like a steel island, surrounded by supply vessels and patrol boats that formed a defensive perimeter around one of Africa's most valuable oil extraction operations. Her first week with Atlas Security had been a crash course in private military operations that bore little resemblance to conventional military service. No lengthy briefings about rules of engagement, no committees debating every tactical decision, no officers more concerned with political implications than mission success. Atlas operated with the kind of efficiency that came from hiring experienced professionals and trusting them to do their jobs. "Welcome to the Crown Jewel," said David Morrison, Atlas's field operations manager, as their helicopter touched down on the platform's landing pad. Morrison was a former Marine Force recon officer who'd spent 3 tours in Somalia before transitioning to private security. He had the lean build and alert eyes that marked him as someone who'd survived places where survival wasn't guaranteed. Sunrise Energy Platform was an impressive feat of engineering and logistics. The main drilling tower rose 400 feet above the ocean surface, surrounded by processing facilities, worker accommodations, and communication arrays that maintained contact with the outside world. Nearly 200 American and European technicians worked around the clock to extract crude oil from deposits that geological surveys suggested could be worth over $10 billion. Your primary responsibility, Morrison explained as they walked through the facility, is perimeter security and threat assessment. We've got patrol boats handling maritime approaches, but long-range reconnaissance is your specialty. Jessica nodded, studying the platform's layout and defensive positions. The structure was well designed for industrial operations, but presented interesting challenges for security work. Multiple levels and complex machinery created both opportunities and vulnerabilities for anyone attempting to attack or defend the facility. What kind of threats are we expecting? Jessica asked. Morrison's expression grew serious. 3 main concerns. First, piracy. West African waters have some of the most active piracy networks in the world, and oil platforms are attractive targets for kidnapping operations. Second, environmental activists. Greenpeace and similar organizations have been conducting increasingly aggressive protests against offshore drilling. Third, and most concerning, is political instability. He led Jessica to a briefing room equipped with satellite communication gear and detailed maps of the regional situation. The Mbalan government is facing a rebellion from the United Liberation Front, led by a former colonel named Joseph Kawanga. The ULF controls most of the interior and has been making increasingly sophisticated attacks against foreign economic interests. Jessica studied the intelligence reports Morrison provided. Kawanga was a former government officer who'd turned rebel after being passed over for promotion due to tribal politics. He commanded an estimated 2,000 fighters and had access to military-grade weapons, including anti-aircraft missiles that made helicopter operations risky beyond the immediate coastal area. Has the UALF made specific threats against Sunrise Energy? Not directly, but they've attacked 3 other foreign oil operations in the past 6 months. 2 were land-based facilities that were completely destroyed. The third was a shipping terminal where they kidnapped 12 European engineers. Morrison paused meaningfully. We recovered the engineers 3 weeks later, but the ransom payment was substantial enough to fund ULF operations for months. Jessica understood the implications. Sunrise Energy represented the kind of high-value target that could provide enough ransom money to transform the ULF from a regional rebellion into a serious threat to the Mbalan government. Protecting the platform wasn't just about corporate security, it was about preventing a humanitarian disaster that could destabilize the entire region. Her first operational assignment came 2 days later. Long-range reconnaissance had detected unusual boat traffic approximately 15 miles southeast of the platform, and Morrison wanted eyes-on assessment of potential threats. Jessica positioned herself in the platform's highest observation post, a reinforced position 380 feet above sea level that provided panoramic views of the surrounding ocean. Her Barrett M82 sniper rifle was mounted on a bipod with advanced optics that could identify targets at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Through her scope, Jessica could see the suspicious vessels, 3 speedboats moving in formation toward shipping lanes used by Sunrise Energy supply convoys. The boats were too far away for positive identification, but their movement patterns suggested coordinated operation rather than random maritime traffic. Overwatch to control, Jessica reported through her radio. I have 3 fast-moving contacts. Bearing 140 degrees, range approximately 12,000 meters. Appears to be coordinated movement toward our supply routes. Morrison's voice crackled back through the radio. Copy that, Overwatch. Can you determine hostile intent? Jessica adjusted her scope's magnification, studying the distant boats for indicators that would distinguish pirates from legitimate fishermen. The vessels were larger than typical fishing boats, with modifications that suggested military rather than commercial use. More concerning, she could see what appeared to be crew-served weapons mounted on each boat's bow. Positive identification. Unmounted weapons, Jessica reported. These are not fishing vessels. Recommend we consider them hostile until proven otherwise. Roger that. Supply Convoy Charlie is inbound from the northeast. Can you provide overwatch? Jessica shifted her position to observe the approaching supply convoy. 2 cargo vessels, escorted by a single patrol boat that carried Atlas security. Personnel. The convoy was following standard approaches that brought them within 8 kilometers of the platform, well within range of the suspicious speedboats. If they chose to intercept, what followed was a tense 30-minute observation period. As Jessica tracked both the convoy and the potential threat, the speedboats altered course twice, clearly maneuvering to intercept the supply vessels at a point where the convoy would be most vulnerable. Control, Overwatch. Hostile vessels are moving to intercept our convoy. Recommend immediate evasive action. Morrison's response was immediate. Convoy Charlie, alter course to bearing 030 and increase speed. You have potential hostile contact approaching from the southeast. Jessica watched through her scope as the supply convoy changed direction, moving away from the intercept point. The speedboats had been targeting. For several minutes, it appeared the threat would pass without incident. Then the speedboats accelerated, clearly abandoning stealth in favor of pursuit. They're going for it, Jessica reported. 3 hostiles in active pursuit of our convoy, range closing rapidly. The next few minutes tested every aspect of Jessica's training and experience. The speedboats were fast and maneuverable, but their pursuit course brought them within range of Jessica's position on the drilling platform. At 8,000 meters she could make the shot, but engaging would reveal Atlas's defensive capabilities and potentially escalate a piracy attempt into something much more serious. Overwatch, what's your assessment? Morrison asked. Jessica tracked the lead speedboat through her scope, watching as armed figures prepared what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades for an attack on the supply convoy. The boats were definitely hostile, definitely preparing to attack American personnel, and definitely within her effective range. I have clear shots on all 3 targets, Jessica reported. Request permission to engage. Stand by, Overwatch. Jessica knew Morrison was calculating the same factors she was. Engaging the speedboats would save the convoy, but reveal that Atlas had long-range defensive capabilities. It would also escalate the regional situation and potentially invite retaliation against the drilling platform itself, but allowing the attack to proceed would mean losing valuable equipment and potentially American lives. The convoy's escort boat was outgunned and couldn't provide adequate protection against 3 coordinated attackers. Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Neutralize the threat. Jessica's breathing slowed as she entered the focused state that preceded every important shot. The lead speedboat was 7,800 meters away, moving at approximately 30 knots in a predictable course toward the supply convoy. Wind was minimal, visibility was excellent, and she had a clear line of sight. Her first shot struck the lead boat's engine compartment, sending a geyser of steam and smoke into the air as the vessel lost power and began to drift. The second shot disabled the port boat, leaving only the starboard vessel still capable of pursuit. But instead of continuing their attack, the remaining speedboat immediately turned away from the convoy and began retreating toward the mainland. Jessica had demonstrated Atlas's capability to engage targets at extreme range, and the pirates clearly decided the risk was no longer worth the potential reward. All targets neutralized or retreating, Jessica reported. Convoy is clear to proceed. Morrison's voice carried obvious satisfaction. Outstanding work, Overwatch. That was textbook threat elimination. As Jessica secured her weapon and prepared to leave the observation post, she felt the familiar mixture of professional satisfaction and underlying concern that followed successful combat operations. She'd protected American personnel and valuable infrastructure, demonstrating the skills that made her valuable to Atlas Security Solutions. But she'd also just announced to every hostile force in the region that Sunrise Energy was defended by professionals, capable of engaging targets at ranges that most pirates and rebels couldn't match. The next attack would be planned with that knowledge in mind, and Jessica suspected it would be considerably more sophisticated than 3 speedboats with small arms. The question was whether Atlas was prepared for the kind of escalation that exceptional defensive capabilities often provoked in regions where conflict was already simmering just below the surface. 3 weeks after the speedboat incident, Jessica found herself 200 miles inland from the drilling platform, crouched in the ruins of a colonial-era mining station that overlooked the Mbalan capital of Port Liberté. What had started as routine threat assessment had evolved into Atlas Security's most dangerous operation since the company began protecting Sunrise Energy's interests. Intelligence reports indicated that Joseph Kawanga's United Liberation Front was planning a major attack on government facilities in the capital, with the ultimate goal of capturing the presidential palace and declaring a new revolutionary government. If successful, the coup would immediately threaten all foreign business interests in Mbala, including the $10 billion offshore drilling operation that employed nearly 500 American and European workers. This is way beyond our normal scope, Morrison had admitted during the mission briefing. But Sunrise Energy has too much invested to abandon their operations based on political instability. Corporate headquarters wants us to assess the ULF's actual capabilities and provide early warning if the rebellion looks likely to succeed. Jessica's mission was reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, not direct action. Her job was to observe ULF movements around the capital, identify key leadership targets, and report back to Atlas Command with assessments of rebel capabilities and intentions. It was exactly the kind of observation-only assignment that had defined her military career, with one crucial difference. This time, her employers trusted her judgment about when circumstances might require more aggressive action. The abandoned mining station provided an ideal observation post. Built by Belgian colonial administrators in the 1940s, it occupied high ground that overlooked the capital's government district, while offering concealment and multiple escape routes. Jessica had been in position for 18 hours, systematically documenting ULF activity through high-powered optics that could identify individual faces at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. What she'd observed was deeply troubling. The ULF wasn't just planning raids or terrorist attacks. They were positioning forces for a coordinated assault that could overwhelm government defenses and capture key infrastructure within hours. Kawanga had clearly learned from failed rebellions in other African countries and was applying sophisticated military planning to what most observers had dismissed as tribal unrest. Through her scope, Jessica could see ULF fighters moving into positions around the presidential palace, the central bank, the telecommunications center, and the airport. These weren't random targets chosen for symbolic value. They were the critical nodes that would allow Kawanga to control the country's political and economic infrastructure once government resistance collapsed. "Control, this is Overwatch," Jessica reported through her encrypted satellite radio. ULF force disposition suggests coordinated assault rather than harassment operations. Estimate 400 to 500 fighters in position around primary government facilities. Morrison's response reflected the gravity of what Jessica was reporting. "Copy that, Overwatch. Any indication of timeline for the operation?" Jessica adjusted her scope to focus on the presidential palace, where she could see ULF spotters conducting detailed reconnaissance of security positions and defensive barriers. "Based on movement patterns and preparation levels, I estimate they're planning to move within the next 12 to 24 hours. That timeline created an impossible situation for Atlas Security. If the ULF succeeded in capturing the government, Sunrise Energy's operating agreements would become worthless and their personnel would become valuable hostages in negotiations with whatever regime Kawanga established. But Atlas was a private security company, not a military force, and they had no legal authority to intervene in Balan internal politics. Overwatch, maintain observation, and continue reporting. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Jessica acknowledged the order, while continuing to track ULF positions through her scope. The rebel force was impressive in its organization and equipment. These weren't the ragtag insurgents that government propaganda had described, but disciplined soldiers with modern weapons and sophisticated tactical coordination. Then Jessica's scope settled on a figure that changed everything. Standing in the courtyard of a government building 800 meters away, coordinating what appeared to be final preparations for the assault, was a man she recognized from Atlas intelligence files. Colonel Marcus Webb, former U.S. Army Special Forces, officially discharged 3 years earlier for selling weapons to insurgent groups in Syria. Webb was supposed to be serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison, but here he was, clearly, serving as Kawanga's military advisor. Control, Overwatch, Priority Intelligence Update. Jessica's voice carried the urgency of someone who just discovered that the situation was far more complex than anyone had realized. I have positive identification on Colonel Marcus Webb, former U.S. Special Forces, currently wanted for arms trafficking. He appears to be directing ULF tactical operations. The radio silence that followed Jessica's report lasted nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in operational communications. When Morrison finally responded, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd just realized that corporate security had evolved into something approaching national security. Confirm identification on Webb. Are you certain? Jessica studied the figure through her scope, comparing facial features, height, and distinctive movement patterns with the photographs in Webb's intelligence file. There was no doubt. The man coordinating the assault on the Balan government was an American traitor who should have been in federal prison. Positive identification confirmed. Webb is approximately 800 meters from my position, actively directing rebel force positioning. Morrison's response revealed the full implications of Jessica's discovery. Overwatch, new mission parameters. Webb represents a direct threat to American interests and personnel. If you have a clear shot, you are authorized to eliminate the target. Jessica felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded high-stakes sniper operations. This wasn't observation anymore. It was direct action against a legitimate military target who threatened American lives and interests. Webb's presence explained how the ULF had acquired sophisticated weapons and tactical expertise, and his elimination could potentially disrupt the entire rebel operation. Range to target, 847 meters. Environmental conditions, minimal wind, excellent visibility, temperature 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Jessica had made similar shots dozens of times during training and combat operations, but never against an American target, even a traitorous one. Through her scope, she could see Webb pointing to specific positions while talking to ULF commanders. He was animated, confident, clearly convinced that his tactical planning would deliver victory to Kawanga's rebellion. Jessica could also see the modern military equipment that Webb had presumably provided: communications gear, advanced weapons, and tactical coordination tools that transformed the ULF from tribal insurgents into a professional military force. Target acquired, Jessica reported. Clear line of sight, optimal environmental conditions, ready to engage on your command. Morrison's authorization came without hesitation. Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Eliminate the target. Jessica's breathing slowed as she entered the meditative state that every successful sniper knew. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, the gentle pressure of the trigger beneath her finger, and the target 847 meters away who threatened American interests and African stability. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The .50 caliber round crossed the distance in 2.3 seconds, striking Webb center mass and dropping him instantly. Through her scope, Jessica watched ULF commanders scatter in confusion as their American advisor collapsed in the courtyard. "Target eliminated," Jessica reported calmly. "Webb is down. Hostile forces appear disorganized." The impact of Webb's elimination was immediate and dramatic. Without their military advisor, ULF commanders began arguing among themselves about whether to proceed with the assault or withdraw to reassess their capabilities. The sophisticated coordination that had marked their preparation dissolved into tribal politics and personal rivalries that Kawanga's charisma alone couldn't resolve. Jessica continued observing as the rebel forces' cohesion crumbled. Units that had been positioned for coordinated assault began withdrawing independently. Commanders abandoned their posts to return to tribal territories, and what should have been a disciplined military operation devolved into exactly the kind of chaotic insurgency that government forces could handle. Control, Overwatch. Hostile forces are withdrawing from assault positions. Estimate 60% reduction in effective strength as units abandon their positions. Morrison's satisfaction was audible through the radio. "Outstanding work, Overwatch. You've probably prevented a civil war and saved hundreds of American jobs." As Jessica began securing her equipment and preparing to withdraw from the observation post, she reflected on how different this mission had been from her military service. No lengthy debates about rules of engagement, no committees second-guessing tactical decisions, no officers more concerned with political implications than mission success. Atlas had trusted her judgment, authorized decisive action, and achieved strategic objectives through professional competence rather than bureaucratic process. But Jessica also understood that this success would have consequences. Webb's elimination would be noticed by intelligence services around the world, and Atlas Security Solutions would be identified as a company capable of conducting precision operations in politically sensitive environments. Future missions would be planned with that knowledge in mind, and Jessica suspected that corporate security was about to evolve into something much more complex and dangerous than protecting oil platforms from pirates. The question was whether Atlas was prepared for the kind of attention that came with proving they could eliminate threats that conventional military forces couldn't touch. 2 days after eliminating Marcus Webb, Jessica sat in the secure communications center aboard the Sunrise Energy platform, staring at intelligence reports that shattered everything she thought she understood about her mission in Mabala. What she believed was a successful operation to protect American interests had actually been a carefully orchestrated deception. That made her an unwitting participant in something far more sinister. The first indication that something was wrong came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chun, a geological surveyor with Sunrise Energy, had approached Jessica with concerns about discrepancies in the company's drilling reports. Chun was a Stanford-educated petroleum engineer who'd been working offshore platforms for 8 years, and she'd noticed something troubling in the extraction data. "The numbers don't add up," Chun explained, spreading geological surveys across the conference table. "According to these reports, we're extracting 40,000 barrels per day from proven reserves. But my analysis of core samples and seismic data suggests the actual reserves are maybe 20% of what's been reported to investors." Jessica studied the technical documents, trying to understand the implications. "Are you saying Sunrise Energy is lying about how much oil they're extracting?" "I'm saying someone is creating false production reports and inflating reserve estimates." Chun's voice carried the frustration of a scientist who discovered that her data was being manipulated. "The geological formations we're drilling simply can't support the production levels that CORPORATE headquarters is reporting to shareholders and government regulators." The revelation was disturbing enough on its own, but Jessica's military experience with intelligence analysis made her recognize patterns that a civilian scientist might miss. If Sunrise Energy was falsifying production data, then the entire justification for Atlas Security's presence in Mabala was based on protecting assets that didn't actually exist. Dr. Chun, have you reported these discrepancies to corporate management? Chun's expression grew troubled. I tried. My supervisor told me to focus on my assigned drilling sectors and stop analyzing company-wide production data. When I persisted, I was told that questioning company reports could be considered corporate espionage and grounds for immediate termination. Jessica felt a familiar chill of recognition. She'd heard similar warnings during her military service. Whenever she discovered information that contradicted official narratives, the pattern was always the same: institutional pressure to ignore inconvenient facts in favor of maintaining approved versions of reality. That evening, Jessica used her security clearance to access Atlas's intelligence databases, ostensibly to review threat assessments for the following week's operations. But instead of studying rebel movement patterns, she began cross-referencing Sunrise Energy's reported activities with independent sources of information about Mbalan oil production. What she found was a web of deception that extended far beyond corporate fraud. Sunrise Energy was indeed falsifying production reports, but the deception served a purpose that had nothing to do with stock manipulation or regulatory compliance. The inflated reserve estimates were being used to justify massive insurance policies and development loans that created paper assets worth billions of dollars. More troubling, Jessica discovered that Joseph Kawanga's United Liberation Front had been receiving weapons and funding through a series of shell companies that traced back to the same financial network supporting Sunrise Energy's operations. The rebellion she'd helped suppress wasn't an external threat to American interests. It was being deliberately sustained to justify Atlas Securities' expensive contract and provide cover for the larger financial fraud. The intelligence reports revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Marcus Webb hadn't been a rogue American military officer selling weapons to African rebels. He'd been a carefully placed asset whose job was to maintain the ULF as a credible threat while ensuring they never became powerful enough to actually threaten Sunrise Energy's operations. His elimination hadn't prevented a coup. It had eliminated someone who knew too much about how the entire system worked. Jessica realized with growing horror that her perfectly executed sniper shot had actually served the conspiracy's interests. With Webb dead, there was no one left who could testify about the connections between Sunrise Energy, the weapons supplies to the ULF, and the financial fraud that justified Atlas's presence in Mabala. She'd been manipulated into eliminating the one person who could have exposed the truth. The secure door to the communication center opened, and Morrison entered with the kind of calm expression that Jessica had learned to associate with dangerous conversations. "Jessica, we need to talk." Morrison took a seat across from her, his eyes noting the intelligence reports spread across the table. "I see you've been doing some independent research. David, what the hell is really going on here?" Jessica's voice carried the controlled anger of someone who'd realized they'd been used. "Sunrise Energy is falsifying production data. The ULF is being funded by the same people who hired us to fight them. And Marcus Webb was eliminated because he knew too much." Morrison's expression didn't change. "You're a smart woman, Jessica. I always knew you'd figure it out eventually." He leaned back in his chair with the casualness of someone discussing routine business. "The question is what you plan to do with that information." "I plan to report it to the appropriate authorities and make sure everyone involved faces justice for fraud, conspiracy, and probably treason." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "To whom, exactly? The FBI? The SEC? The Pentagon?" He gestured toward the intelligence reports. "Sunrise Energy has contracts with the Department of Defense, consulting agreements with the State Department, and lobbying relationships with half of Congress. Atlas Security Solutions is a subsidiary of Meridian Defense Industries, which holds classified contracts worth $12 billion annually. Jessica felt the ground shifting beneath her as Morrison revealed the full scope of what she'd stumbled into. "You're saying this conspiracy involves the U.S. government?" "I'm saying this operation has been approved at levels that make your concerns irrelevant." Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The money being generated through Ballon oil fraud funds black operations that Congress won't authorize and foreign intelligence activities that maintain American strategic interests around the world." The implications were staggering. Jessica had thought she was working for a private security company, protecting legitimate business interests. Instead, she'd been recruited into a covert operation that used corporate fraud to fund illegal government activities while eliminating anyone who threatened to expose the system. "The 20 soldiers you saved in Afghanistan," Morrison continued, "were part of a unit that was investigating similar financial irregularities in Iraq oil contracts. Your court-martial wasn't really about disobeying orders. It was about removing you from a position where you might discover information that certain people wanted to remain classified." Jessica's world tilted as Morrison revealed that even her original military service had been manipulated by the same conspiracy she'd just uncovered. Colonel Hayes was part of this? Hayes was following orders from people who understood that your exceptional skills made you both valuable and dangerous. The court-martial served two purposes. It discredited you enough that any future accusations would be dismissed as the complaints of a disgraced soldier, and it made you desperate enough to accept employment with organizations that could monitor and control your activities. Morrison stood and walked to the secure communications console. "Atlas didn't recruit you despite your court-martial, Jessica. We recruited you because of it. Everything that's happened, your discharge, your financial difficulties, your recruitment, your missions here, has been carefully orchestrated to put you in position to eliminate specific threats while ensuring you could never credibly expose the larger operation." Jessica stared at Morrison, realizing that her entire adult life had been shaped by a conspiracy that viewed her as a useful tool rather than a human being. "And now that I know the truth?" Morrison's smile was cold and professional. "Now you have a choice. You can continue working for Atlas, accepting that the world is more complicated than you were taught to believe, and earning compensation that reflects the true value of your skills. Or you can try to expose a conspiracy that involves some of the most powerful people in America, knowing that a court-martialed soldier with a history of disobedience has no credibility against established institutions." The choice Morrison presented wasn't really a choice at all. Jessica could remain silent and complicit in activities that violated everything she'd sworn to protect, or she could speak out and face the same institutional destruction that had ended her military career. But as Morrison waited for her response, Jessica thought about the 20 soldiers she'd saved in Afghanistan, about Dr. Chun's courage in reporting scientific fraud despite threats to her career, and about the oath she'd taken to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Some choices were about more than personal survival. "David," Jessica said quietly, "I need some time to think about this." Morrison nodded as if he'd expected that response. "Of course, take all the time you need, but Jessica?" His voice carried an unmistakable threat. "Remember that accidents happen frequently in dangerous places like Mabala. It would be unfortunate if someone with your skills became involved in an incident that prevented them from sharing their concerns with inappropriate audiences." As Morrison left the communications center, Jessica realized that her second chance at a meaningful career had actually been a trap designed to ensure her silence about activities that threatened the democratic principles she'd sworn to defend. The question now was whether she had the courage to fight a conspiracy that had already destroyed her once and clearly wouldn't hesitate to do so again. Jessica spent the next 24 hours in her quarters, staring at the encrypted satellite phone that could connect her to the one person who might help expose the conspiracy that had controlled her life. Sarah Martinez, The investigative journalist who'd published her original leak about Meridian Bank's discriminatory lending practices had built a career on exposing institutional corruption that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. But calling Martinez would mean crossing a line that Morrison had made clear would result in fatal consequences. Jessica understood that Atlas Security wasn't just a private military company. It was the enforcement arm of a conspiracy that had already demonstrated its willingness to eliminate threats through carefully orchestrated accidents and strategic assassinations. The decision was complicated by Dr. Chun's sudden disappearance. The geological engineer had failed to report for her morning shift, and platform security claimed she'd been evacuated to the mainland for a family emergency that couldn't be verified through any official channels. Jessica suspected that Chun's questions about production discrepancies had made her a liability that the conspiracy couldn't tolerate. As Jessica weighed her options, she received an unexpected visitor. Torres, the sergeant she'd saved in Afghanistan, somehow appeared at her quarters door wearing civilian clothes and carrying identification that marked him as a security consultant for an oil services company. "Sergeant Hamilton," Torres said quietly, "we need to talk. Somewhere private." Jessica led him to the platform's maintenance section, an area filled with industrial noise that would mask their conversation from electronic surveillance. "Mike, what the hell are you doing here? How did you even find me?" Torres's expression was grim. "The 20 soldiers you saved have been keeping track of each other since Afghanistan. When Richardson heard you'd been hired by Atlas Security, he started asking questions." Torres paused meaningfully. "Richardson works for Defense Intelligence now. What he found out about Atlas made him very concerned about your safety." Jessica felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. What did he discover? Atlas Security Solutions is a front organization for Meridian Defense Industries, which has been under federal investigation for fraudulent billing and unauthorized operations in 7 countries. Torres handed Jessica an encrypted phone. "Richardson wants to talk to you, but not through any communication system that Atlas controls." The phone connected Jessica to Richardson's secure line, and her former comrade's voice carried the urgency of someone who discovered information that powerful people wanted to suppress. "Jessica, listen carefully. Meridian Defense has been using Atlas operations to eliminate witnesses and acquire intelligence for clients that include foreign governments and criminal organizations. The FBI has been building a case, but they need someone with inside knowledge to provide evidence that will hold up in federal court." Jessica looked around the maintenance area, knowing that her conversation was probably being monitored despite their precautions. "Danny, if I cooperate with a federal investigation, I'll be dead within hours." "Not if you're in federal custody," Richardson replied. "We've got a Coast Guard cutter 12 miles from your position. If you can get off that platform, we can provide protection and transport to a secure location where you can give testimony that will bring down the entire network." The offer represented everything Jessica had thought was impossible: a chance to expose the conspiracy while protecting herself from retaliation. But it also meant abandoning Dr. Chun and any other innocent people who might be trapped in the same web of deception that had controlled Jessica's life. What about the other people involved? "There's a geological engineer who discovered the oil production fraud. She's disappeared, probably eliminated because she asked too many questions." Torres's voice was quiet but determined. "We'll find her, Jessica. But right now, you're the only person who can provide testimony that connects Meridian Defense to specific criminal activities. Without your evidence, the entire investigation collapses and everyone responsible walks away." Jessica realized that this was the choice she'd been avoiding since her original court-martial: whether to prioritize personal safety or accept the risks that came with doing what was right. In Afghanistan, she'd chosen to save 20 soldiers, despite orders that would have protected her career. Now she faced a similar decision on a much larger scale. "How do I get off this platform without Atlas knowing?" Torres smiled for the first time since arriving. "Remember Corporal Chun from our unit? She's a helicopter pilot now, working maritime rescue operations. Turns out there's going to be a medical emergency on this platform in about 30 minutes that requires immediate evacuation." The evacuation proceeded exactly as Torres had planned. Jessica suffered a convincing allergic reaction to her dinner that required immediate medical attention at a mainland hospital. The Coast Guard helicopter that responded to Atlas's emergency call carried her away from the platform while Morrison watched helplessly from the control center. But instead of flying to a hospital, the helicopter delivered Jessica to a federal facility where Richardson and a team of Justice Department prosecutors were waiting with questions about Meridian Defense's operations, Atlas Security's activities, and the conspiracy that had controlled her military and civilian careers. Jessica's testimony provided the missing pieces that federal investigators needed to understand how the conspiracy operated. Her inside knowledge of Atlas operations, combined with Dr. Chun's geological data and financial records that Richardson had obtained through official channels, created a comprehensive picture of fraud that reached into the highest levels of government and military contracting. The resulting investigation led to the largest defense contractor fraud case in American history. Meridian Defense Industries was dissolved. Its executives faced federal racketeering charges, and the financial networks that had funded illegal operations were dismantled. Atlas Security Solutions was shut down, its personnel questioned about their involvement in activities that violated both domestic and international law. But Jessica's real vindication came from an unexpected source. The Army Review Board, responding to new evidence about the circumstances of her original court-martial, overturned her conviction and restored her military rank with full honors. Colonel Hayes, facing her own federal investigation for participation in the conspiracy, could no longer block recognition of what Jessica had actually accomplished in Afghanistan. 6 months after her testimony brought down Meridian Defense, Jessica stood before a military ceremony that officially recognized her service and sacrifice. The same 20 soldiers she'd saved in Afghanistan were present, along with Dr. Chun, who had been found alive in a Meridian safe house and released when federal agents raided the facility. General Patricia Morrison, Hayes's replacement, presented Jessica with the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an armed enemy. "Staff Sergeant Hamilton," Morrison said, "your actions in Afghanistan demonstrated the highest traditions of military service. Your courage in exposing institutional corruption has protected countless American lives and upheld the democratic principles our military exists to defend." As Jessica accepted the medal, she thought about the circuitous path that had led from a split-second decision to save 20 soldiers to a years-long struggle against a conspiracy that had tried to destroy her for being too good at her job. The institution that had once court-martialed her for disobedience now honored her for the same moral courage that had made her willing to fight for what was right, regardless of personal cost. Jessica's story became a cautionary tale about institutional corruption and an inspiration for soldiers who faced impossible choices between following orders and protecting innocent lives. She returned to military service as an instructor at the Army Sniper School, teaching the next generation of marksmen that technical skill was meaningless without the moral courage to use it in defense of American values. The 20 soldiers whose lives she'd saved with a single shot had returned the favor by saving her from a conspiracy that would have destroyed anyone who tried to fight it alone. Sometimes the greatest victories required the courage to trust that doing right would ultimately matter more than following rules that served the wrong people. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.